was sort of planned as a conference both be in the US and also in Ghana. So I was actually invited to attend, and I quite frankly knew nothing about the topic of West African cities. But one of the presenters, Ola, showed this amazing, very interesting photograph of a building in Nigeria. It was a modern building, and I was just struck by the fact that I knew nothing about that building, or really had not seen it in history books that sort of covered that period. And so it just sparked a very, just kind of an interest, like that's very kind of peculiar. And then a couple months later, just perusing through the school's library, I found a really great book called New Directions in African Architecture, which was published in '68 by Uwe Kolterman, which basically covered a lot of what became known as tropical modernism around the African continent. And again, I thought, wow, this was extraordinary, but what's the legacy of this? Both how is it being treated when it was being done, and then what's the kind of contemporary condition of a lot of this work? And so it just sparked a desire to basically, sort of look at this work. So I asked if she would come with me on this crazy trip that we took to Ghana. We just decided, all right, let's go and just look at this stuff. And I think part of it was that we just wanted to know more about this work. And one of them was, why did this work have sort of greater visibility in the modernist canon? How did it compare to other projects that we know in Brazil and India, done in that same period? How do these buildings fit really within the nation's building period of the 50s and 60s? Because we recognize they were embedded in certain kind of socio-political context. And what was their current status in our globalized age? So in other words, like how are these buildings actually being occupied and today can still exist? So this is kind of what piqued our interest, I think, in the whole process. But it's also sort of, I think, understanding maybe two more simple questions that we could say emerged just out of the research. And after we came back, we basically didn't really do much with the photographs for a couple of years, and then the show sort of came up as a possibility. And so I think reviewing the work and learning more about these architects and the context and sort of political history and so forth, I think one of the things that we tried to do is consider these questions. And one is probably more professional and methodological, and the other one is really more, I think, a critical question. And so I think the questions for us were, how do architects go to places they've never visited to research, record, and interpret buildings and cultures they encounter? And a lot of it is that, yes, we look with photographs, we document, we now all have video cameras and our mobile. And so there's a way in which we're always learning about looking at things, but in what ways do we understand that as a kind of process of investigation that feels a creative process? And the other is, what is the relation of Africa to architectural modernism? I think it's a thorny question that art historians have basically interrogated over the years, but it seems to have been somewhat off the radar within the discipline of architecture. Can we do what Oakley and Wieser, the curator, the fantastic curator and theorist, who's part of Youthbrand's Monday's conversation, was actually fantastic with Dancer Pascal and Kayla, Mamadou and Oakley and Wieser participated in that. But he wrote in his book, The Short Century, I think this comes from the intro, is how do we look, which is basically to productively look closely at how African modernism accomplishes its modernity. And that was one of the questions that he sort of posed, and I think that was one of the